Malaysia has known one ruling coalition for more than 50 years, but forthcoming parliamentary elections look likely to be the closest yet. So is it time for change? And can the opposition leader shake off years of allegations and controversy? Malaysia heads to the polls. This is Inside Story. Hello everyone, I'm Kamal Santamaria. So, Parliament is dissolved and the gloves are off in Malaysia as political leaders gear up for a fight over corruption, discrimination and the cost of living. Parliamentary polls will pit the National Front coalition, which has been in power since 1957, against a resurgent opposition. Already the ruling group's been knocked back, suffering its worst ever results last time around in 2008. And it won't be plain sailing this time either. 3 million first-time voters, nearly a quarter of those eligible, will have to decide who to give their support to. So lots for us to talk about with our guests after this from Stephanie Scowen in the Malaysian capital, Kuala Lumpur.
Wednesday was the 4th anniversary of Prime Minister Najib Razak's time in power, so it was perhaps appropriate that he chose today to dissolve Parliament and call for the 13th general election. Now, these polls are going to be the most closely fought after since the country gained independence in 1957. And while the ruling Barisan Nasional has held power since 1957, the opposition has slowly gained inroads into that power base. At the last election in 2008, they gained 4 states and removed Barisan Nasional's 2/3 majority, which was a massive slap in the face for the then Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi. Badawi obviously resigned in the wake of those polls, and his replacement, Najib, has sought since then to win back some of those lost votes. He's handed out millions of dollars to the poor, to civil servants, to workers from Petronas, the government oil and gas firm, which the opposition says is blatant vote buying. Now, there have been lots of calls for free and fair elections. There's a lot of concern about foreign nationals from Indonesia and Malaysia being given ID cards so that they can vote in the election when they wouldn't be allowed normally to do so. So it is being closely watched. And while many observers say the government is still likely to retain power, Najib is still warning, though, that if the opposition do win, there has to be a smooth transition.
All right, then let's introduce our panel for today. Of course, we go to Kuala Lumpur, which is where Chandra Muzaffar joins us from. He's a Malaysian political scientist and Islamic reformist and activist. His views, we might say, closer to those of the government. Also in the Malaysian capital is Kian Ming Ong, an election strategist for the opposition Democratic Action Party. And rounding out the panel in Boston, actually, United States, Zachary Abuza is a professor of political science at Simmons College in Boston. He specialises in Southeast Asian politics and security issues. So thank you, gentlemen, to all of you for coming on the show today. Chandra Muzaffar, if I can start with you. I think it is, to be fair, a nervous time for any leader when they decide to dissolve Parliament and say, right, we're going to this election now. Now is the best time for me to do this. I have to do this now. I guess the added thing for the Parliament or the government, the ruling party in Malaysia, is that they've got these memories of 2008 where things started to go wrong. They started to lose their majority and they're wondering, can we hold it together this time?
I have no doubt at all that this is a crucial election for the Prime Minister and the ruling coalition. But if you look at certain trends, I think there is a certain degree of confidence, quiet confidence, that the Barisan Nasional will retain power for 3 reasons. Number one, if you look at the series of by-elections that were held before 2010, and these were the last by-elections, the Barisan did fairly well in those by-elections. And by-elections are very important criteria. Number two, the Prime Minister has introduced a series of reforms, among them economic reforms. And if you look at the Malaysian economy at the moment, it's doing fairly well. If you look at the economy in relation to the global economy, 5.4% growth rate, a certain degree of distribution which has taken place, and recent statistics, reduction of absolute poverty, improvement in the Gini coefficient for income, and so on and so forth. And number three, the demands from a certain segment of our society for greater democratic space. He has been able to respond to those demands to some extent. The abolition of the Internal Security Act, he has introduced the Freedom of Assembly Act, and he has abolished the various emergency ordinances. So those are changes which the Malaysian public would welcome.
Okay, Kian Ming Ong over there in KL as well. You know, Chandra lays out a pretty good argument there. He's given 3 key points. I'd like you to refute them.
Yeah, I think the very fact that this Prime Minister has allowed Parliament to almost automatically dissolve shows that there is actually not much confidence in the many transformation programs that he has put in place since taking over power in 2009. Dr. Chandra talked about the various economic transformation programs as well as government transformation programs. The very fact is that despite the relatively decent economic performance of the country, many people on the street do not feel any increase or significant increase in their incomes. Inequality, the perception is that inequality is actually rising, despite the statistics that the Department of Statistics has come out with recently. The cost of living in the urban areas continue to increase, and I think despite some political opening that the Prime Minister has presided over, I think there's much more to be done, and I think the majority of the voters feel that this is a opportune time for there to be a transition in government after 56 years of Barisan Nasional rule.
Okay, while we're talking about the Prime Minister and what he's been saying, let's actually just quickly hear from him, because Prime Minister Najib has been, as we've heard here, pointed to his government's achievements during his time as leader. Just have a quick listen to this.
In the last 4 years, all Malaysians have experienced and witnessed a huge change in the economy, the politics, and socially within our nation under the government's transformation program, which has brought tremendous change to people's lives and prosperity to the country. I urge all Malaysians and political parties to take note that if there is a change of power at federal or state level at the next election, it must be transferred peacefully and smoothly.
Zachary Abuza, might be a good time to bring you in from Boston at this point. I mean, what do you think of what the Prime Minister says there? Is he sort of, overcooking it a little bit? And when he says all Malaysians have seen this huge growth, sort of following on from what our previous guest has been saying?
As the guy here who doesn't have a horse in the race, I almost agree with both of them. I think the government can take a lot of credit for what they've done. I don't disagree with what Dr. Chandra said. In fact, I might even throw in a couple other things that the government has done very well in the past couple of years. They've made great improvements in race relations. Back in November 2007, there were some of the worst riots in the country. So I think he's done a lot there. He's certainly improved the country's international standing, and Malaysia has played a very important role in dealing with some regional conflicts in the Philippines and southern Thailand. Malaysia had a successful presidency of the OIC. So he's done those things very well. And yet, we have an opportunity for the opposition. Clearly, not everyone has gained. I'm not sure I do believe with the overall Gini coefficient figures that the inequality is being eliminated. The economy is growing, but it always creates winners and losers. The government has had to come out in the past year with roughly $2 billion in cash handouts, which might be important, but to many look like blatant vote buying tactics. So, there's a lot to be said. The government has some real challenges in this election. The ruling coalition only won 51% of the popular vote in the last one, though they won much higher share in the parliamentary seats. They're going up against a very charismatic opposition leader in Anwar Ibrahim.
Right, so it's a good point to talk about the two people in particular in this race. The two main leaders, Najib Razak, who we have spoken about, the current Prime Minister, National Front coalition he is at the head of, and has been in power for more than 50 years, that coalition. Najib himself took over in 2009 following a disastrous election for the coalition, which lost its two-thirds majority. He'll be highlighting, as we've talked about already, Malaysia's strong economic growth under his stewardship as a reason for his re-election. And then we've got, as Zachary was just talking about, Anwar Ibrahim, the leader of the opposition and a former deputy Prime Minister. Fired from office in 1998 and tried for abuse of power and having sex with a man. Anwar spent 6 years in jail but was eventually cleared of that sodomy charge. He was also acquitted of new allegations of sodomy last year. He's called all those charges politically motivated. Anwar is pledging to tackle government authoritarianism and corruption. He's promising tax cuts and increasing subsidies and addressing complaints of discrimination against minority ethnic Chinese and Indians. Zachary, why don't I just stay with you for a quick word, what you think about Anwar Ibrahim. You called him quite charismatic there, but you know, even though he's been acquitted and cleared of all those charges I mentioned, mud sticks, doesn't it? And I wonder if that's going to be still too much of a hurdle for him.
Mud sticks? I'm not sure it does in his case. He's risen from the political dead almost 3 times now. He is a very charismatic figure. He's held together a very fractious opposition. I mean, someone like myself has a really hard time believing that secular Chinese and Islamists can really hold together a coalition. Anwar's done it, but more importantly than that, Malaysia is at the point now where it's really ready to move beyond its race-based politics. And I think Anwar and people look to Anwar as the person who is able to do this, that he can, his party is really the first party that's tried to go out there and move beyond sectarian and racial lines. And he is charismatic. He could do this. If anyone can do it, it's him.
Okay, so we should probably hear from him as well. I should point out that Anwar Ibrahim wanted to be on this show, but he did have a prior commitment. He spoke to Al Jazeera a little bit earlier about his priorities going into the parliamentary polls. Again, have a quick listen.
Well, the central focus in our elections is good governance, to mature as a democratic nation. And therefore, the institutions have got to be strengthened and fortified. And there's a general consensus, not only among the opposition, but the general masses of Malaysians who are tired of the ruling clique and establishment amassing wealth by the billions and allowing for the gap to grow between the very rich and the very poor. And the second issue, as you have said, it relates to the issue of racial harmony. Ours is a multiracial coalition led by Malay Muslims, of course, but there's a clear position to respect the rights of all Malaysians and to rid the country of excesses, corruption, and discriminatory practice that help enrich the few.
Kian Ming, let me come back to you. Anwar Ibrahim talks a good game, and as Zachary said, he's come back from what should have been the political dead 3 times now. Again, I wonder about the past. Do you, as an opposition person, do you worry about people's perceptions about him, the way he might still be viewed or otherwise?
I think there are a couple of points I'd like to raise here in regards to Anwar Ibrahim as well as the Pakatan Rakyat Coalition. Firstly, I think Anwar Ibrahim has been very bold in coming up to say that he is in favor of abolishing the new economic policy in terms of affirmative action based on race. He wants to abolish that and replace that with an affirmative action policy that's based on needs. And he's received a lot of flack in the mainstream press for this, saying that he's betrayed Malay rights, but I think he's stood his ground firmly, and I think that is an indication of the kind of opposition coalition that can work together and can govern together as a coalition that sees beyond race, as what Zachary has said previously. And also want to bring up the issue of not being able to see eye to eye even within the coalition, the fractious nature of the coalition, as what Zachary was talking about just now. I want to point out that within Pakatan Rakyat, none of our parties are actually race-based parties in the sense that we have membership from all races in all the 3 coalition parties within Pakatan, DAP, PKR, as well as PAS. And in this coming election, all three parties will be fielding candidates from all races in Malaysia. PAS, for example, is going to field a Chinese candidate, a Chinese Christian candidate in one of the seats against a BN, Barisan Nasional Component Party. And PKR as well as DAP will be fielding candidates from Malay candidates, Chinese candidates, Indian candidates, as well as native candidates in the states of Sabah and Sarawak. So we have a multiracial coalition that is also comprised of multiracial parties, and also we've governed together as a multiracial coalition, making the necessary compromises and putting the states that we've governed properly forward in terms of governance and also in terms of racial harmony in Penang as well as Selangor.
I think that will play a role here. Malaysia, a little unusual, and that is split in two, really. If you look on the map on the left, that narrow peninsula, the western region, where the capital Kuala Lumpur is. And then across the South China Sea, you've got the eastern part, forming part of the island of Borneo. Malaysia, as I say, ethnically diverse. Ethnic Malays make up 60% of the population. They're the most dominant group in politics. You've got the ethnic Chinese then, they form just a little over a quarter of the population, and they hold a lot of economic power. And the remainder are ethnic Indians and indigenous peoples. These are among the poorest people in Malaysia. Chandra Muzaffar, let me bring you back into the conversation now. I think I know what your views on Anwar Ibrahim are going to be. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you've had a defamation case against him in the past. So maybe I'll actually ask you about not Anwar Ibrahim, about Prime Minister Najib, and tell me why, maybe justify why he should get another term in office. I think it will be interesting in this vote because there are a lot of young voters voting this time, a lot of first-time young voters who may not align themselves so much with a party that's been in power for 50 years and might look at the opposition candidate and think, maybe he's the future.
Well, I think there are a couple of issues that should be clarified first.
Sure.
The DAP, for instance, Ken Meng's party, is a preponderantly Chinese party. And if you look at one of the underlying forces which drives Malaysian politics to this very day, it is still ethnicity. Beyond all the rhetoric about governance and about fighting corruption and so on, a lot of Chinese are inclined towards the DAP and the Pakatan at this point in time, including Anwar Ibrahim, because they see the DAP and Anwar Ibrahim putting to an end what they see as Malay dominance. Now, that's an ethnic sentiment. And I would argue that that sort of ethnic sentiment is actually quite superficial and shallow. What is Malay dominance? If you look at the history of this country, it was a country that emerged from a Malay polity, and you had a Malay elite that shared this land with non-Malays on a basis which has got no precedent in history. And yet one talks about Malay dominance. You look at the non-Malay role in politics, given the fact that we have had this sort of history, their role is really very, very significant. And if you look at non-Malays in the cultural sphere, their cultural presence is overwhelming. If you look at non-Malays in the economy, you just do a profile of the country. Who dominates the upper stratum of our economy? Who dominates the middle stratum of our economy? Which communities are most prominent? So I think this sort of mythology, this is one of the problems with the way in which politics has been played. How can one describe the Islamic Party as a party that stands for change and reform? It is basically a party which has a very dogmatic view on various issues. Tactically, it has adopted a number of measures recently, but in terms of its constitution, in terms of its politics, it is very, very dogmatic. It subscribes to the Sharia-based, hudud-oriented notion of an Islamic state. Let me finish. This is a very important point.
Well, no, I just want to
That is the sort of
actually...
Islamic party that we are talking about.
The only reason I want to jump in is because you've brought up the issue of ethnicity, which is...
If you talk about Anwar Ibrahim, what is his record? When Anwar Ibrahim was the Minister of Finance, he almost drove our economy to ruin, partly because he was following IMF prescriptions and also because he was listening to a little coterie around him. That's his ability as a minister. When he was Minister of Education, he created an ethnic problem through some of the policies that he pursued. So let's not have this sort of mythologization of political leaders and political parties. The reality is that we are now faced with a challenge that we have never had to face before. On the one hand, you have a challenge from a segment of the Malay community.
I am going to interrupt you this time, only because I have to worry about...
With a very idealized vision of Islam. And you have got, on the other hand, the Chinese political party, which has grievances, some of which are very legitimate, but other grievances which have got no basis at all.
OK, John, I'm just wary of our time here. That's why I did want to interrupt you, because we've obviously got our other guests to hear from as well. Kian Ming, Chandra's outlined a lot of reasons there why Anwar Ibrahim is the wrong guy. Would you like to respond just quickly?
I think for the very reasons that Dr. Chandra has brought up, those are reasons in which we actually feel they're good enough to, they're very good reasons for us to support Pakatan Rakyat. The very premise on which he still subscribes to the same kind of race-based politics that Pakatan does not subscribe to, I think it's something that is that belongs to the past, that is very much the underlying structure of the Barisan Nasional, despite the rhetoric that Najib Tun Razak, the Prime Minister, has given. And I think a lot of his accusations based on what Anwar has done in the past are actually quite spurious. For example, Anwar Ibrahim was the finance minister during the time when we had budget surpluses. We've not had a budget surplus since 1997. We've presided over many decades of profligate debt growth under Barisan Nasional, and we continue to see the high levels of corruption that I think would increase even further if, let's say, Barisan Nasional does come back into power for the last term, I think.
He had cronies. Anwar had cronies all over the place. He was involved in corruption. What are you trying to say? Kian Ming, come on, be honest about the situation of the country.
I think
Anwar has been very closely associated with mass corruption.
You
can't run away from that.
Someone like Chandra.
Come on,
because we just need to look at
it's not unbecoming. I was in the political party, Kian Ming. I was deputy
Gentlemen, we've got a bit of a problem here,
and I know what Anwar stands for, and I know Anwar's politics.
Can I interrupt you both, please, because I can't actually hear either of you. OK, there's a pause. Let me jump in there, because I can't actually hear either of you at the moment, unfortunately. Even though you're both in Kuala Lumpur, we've got a good satellite delay there, it appears. Let's just move on a little bit. We're starting to run down the clock. I mentioned this before when I was speaking to Chandra, and maybe, Kian Ming, I'll get your view very quickly. The new voters, around 3 million or so new voters, fresh voters coming into the election. It looks like a lot of them will be young voters. How do you capture the Malaysian youth at the moment, do you think?
Yeah, I think this is one area in which Pakatan does have the upper hand. There's going to be 3 million out of 13 million new voters. Almost a quarter of voters will be first-time voters. About 60% of them are under the age of 30, and they do not have any particularly strong affiliation to the BN or even to Pakatan. So their votes are up for grabs. I think being first-time voters, being voters who are not exposed to the kind of media barrage that many of our older voters are exposed to, especially in the mainstream media, many of them would likely vote for the opposition. And I think if we can get about 60% of the vote of these first-time voters, it will be sufficient for us to be able to win a slight majority and for us to capture power in Putrajaya. And these are the voters which actually do not consume news through traditional channels. Most of them consume news through social media, through the internet, through YouTube. And these are places where I think the opposition, as well as other anti-government organizations and voices, have a much larger presence.
Gentlemen, just before you go, why don't we have a quick listen to what some of our viewers have been saying to us. We've, of course, got the Inside Story Facebook page, and these are some of the comments that have been left today. Ali Kusno says, we support the reformation of the Malaysian nation. Take that either way, I guess. Fazrin Jamal writes, we are ready for change. I'm tired of the autocratic rule of the Barisan Nasional. That's the ruling National Front coalition, of course. Arshan Ansari tells us, though, and this is a fair point, what is the problem if the ruler is good? And this is what Chandra was saying to us a little bit earlier. And we've also heard from Peter Okoye, who adds, the Barisan Nasional are not doing enough for their country. It's good to have changes at times, but I hope Malaysians won't regret the change when it comes. So some views there from our viewers, but of course it's our guests who we have to thank, Chandra Muzaffar and Kian Ming Ong, who were both in Kuala Lumpur, and Zachary Abuza, who was in Boston. Thank you, gentlemen, to you all, and thank you, of course, our viewers, for joining us for this edition of Inside Story. You can find this program, many more, of course, on our website at aljazeera.com. You just follow the links to programs and then on to Inside Story. You can leave your comments there too, like we just saw those Facebook comments. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.